The ground cracked beneath Elias Voss's fingertips as he clawed forward through the dust-stormed wasteland, his breath ragged in the dry air. Above him, the sky churned in a violent spiral, threads of lightning threading to the dark vortex like veins through a bruised body. The storm was growing. That much was obvious to anyone with eyes, but the sensors embedded in his suit painted an even bleaker picture. Electromagnetic saturation had increased by 30% in just 20 minutes. Whatever this was, it wasn't just weather, it was something else, something sentient. Elias shoved himself to his feet, coughing grit from his lungs as he glanced back at the others. His unit, the remnants of Earth's last orbital defense division, trudged behind him in silence. No one spoke anymore. What words could explain the sky tearing itself open? What phrases could lend meaning to the mass migrations? The cities swallowed by flickering auroras, the billions lost when communication satellites fell screaming from orbit. Still nothing from command? Lieutenant Rami asked beside him, his voice hushed like he feared waking the sky. Elias shook his head. Command's gone. Last ping came from Quito Station. That was 4 hours ago. They both looked upward, past the spiraling clouds, where shreds of once glorious space stations now orbited like haunted debris. They had been humanity's triumphs, symbols of expansion and hope. Now they were reminders, ruined, burning, helpless reminders of how fragile everything was. But Elias wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The first signs of the alien arrival weren't lights or ships. They were thoughts, a low-frequency hum that slipped beneath words, threading into back of the mind like a whisper from the marrow of the earth. The soldiers froze when they heard it. Civilians wept. Elias clenched his teeth and demanded it stop, but the whisper only deepened, until it coalesced into a voice, so clear it sounded like it was being spoken beside him. I come not to invade, but to instruct. He collapsed to his knees, not from pain, but from sheer mental weight. The others around him dropped as well, some screaming, some clutching at ears that no longer mattered. A ripple passed over the horizon, distorting the air like heat on metal. And then it came, his form descending not in a ship, but as a projection, towering and translucent, draped in robes that shimmered like starlight. Not a being of flesh, but of knowledge. Karinov, I am a teacher, the alien said, his voice deep and musical. A traveler of systems lost to entropy. I arrive at worlds reaching the threshold, where decisions fracture destiny. Elias staggered to his feet, meeting the gaze of the impossible creature. What do you want from us? He demanded. Karinov did not blink. Perhaps he couldn't. I offer knowledge. And warning. A storm of magnetic force now brews in your upper atmosphere. It is not natural. It is a filter placed long ago. No species, once reaching this point, has passed through it. Not one. The words fell heavy on Elias, heavier than the dust in his lungs. Why now? Rami asked, why didn't you come earlier when we could have done something? Karinov tilted his head slightly, the motion oddly graceful. Because knowledge is poison before it is purpose. You are ready now or you are not. The message was broadcast planet-wide. The alien teacher offered salvation. Ships would arrive, capable of bypassing the magnetic storm, vessels outside the influence of known physics. They could carry a limited number of humans to a nearby habitable world, a refuge, a new beginning. But only those who accepted the truth. Earth was lost. There would be no saving it. Elias watched the world fracture from the concrete confines of an abandoned listening post in the Andes. News feeds streamed images of riots in Sao Paulo, torchlit marches in Berlin, airborne battles over refugee corridors in Southeast Asia. The elite scrambled for tickets. Politicians brokered survival for families. Billionaires bartered influence for escape. And those left behind? They scavenged hope like scraps from a crumbling table. Elias refused. It wasn't just pride or nostalgia or rage, though he felt all those things. It was something simpler. He didn't believe the alien. No species has passed through, he muttered, staring out the storm as it spiraled like a giant eye over the Pacific. Maybe none stayed long enough to try. Karinov returned 3 nights later, this time materializing directly within their base perimeter, shimmering between radar blinks. The soldiers raised weapons reflexively, but Elias motioned them down. "You came again," Elias said. "I thought you were only offering the ride." "I am," Karinath replied, "but I have watched your kind. There is friction in you, refusal to yield." "Is that a compliment?" "It is a curiosity," the alien replied, his form flickering as lighting split the clouds above. "You are not the first to doubt, but all who stayed perished. The storm devours. It pulls, reshapes, dismantles. Your planet is incompatible with continued life. And what if we could anchor ourselves?" Elias asked, "What if we didn't try to escape, but endured it?" "No magnetic tether can hold," Karinath said. "No structure will remain intact. The storm will tear molecules apart. Gravity will reverse. You will float, burn, crack." Elias stepped forward. "We've built cities underwater. We've walked on the moon. You say no species pass because none could anchor themselves? Then we'll do that. We'll tie ourselves to the ground if we have to." The alien's form remained still, but something in the air shifted. A hesitation, maybe, or wonder. "I will not stop you," Karinath said at last. "But know this, the test does not measure resistance. It measures purpose." With that, he vanished, leaving only the ghost of his word behind. Later that night, as Elias sat before a flickering plasma screen, watching entire continents go dark under magnetic surge, Rami approached him quietly. "You really believe we can survive it?" he asked. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the storm, a furious, growing vortex that had already swallowed the ionosphere and was reaching lower with every hour. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think the storm is more than science. I think it's waiting to see if we run." And he would not this time, not when something ancient was watching to see whether humanity would kneel or stand, not when the only way forward was through. The wind howled like a warning across the jagged basin where Elias and his team had carved out what was left of Command Center. Beneath their boots, the earth was still warm, pulsing faintly with residual energy from the storms above. The sky remained fractured, like glass struck but not shattered, its spiral rotating slowly, hypnotically, over the western horizon. "We need to go deeper," Dr. Riapatel said, her voice clipped but calm. She stood over a field terminal, her dark eyes focused on a fluctuating readout. "The crust here isn't stable enough to absorb the resonance patterns we're projecting." Elias knelt beside her, watching the magnetic waveform pulse in sharp peaks. "Can we reroute the discharge?" he asked. "Force it into the caldera grid?" Ria hesitated, calculating silently before nodding. "It's possible, but it means using the anchoring coils now. If they short, there's no replacement, no second attempt." He stood, brushing ash from his palms. "Then we don't fail." The team moved fast, a dozen scientists and engineers working shoulder to shoulder with hardened soldiers. The term grounded had gone from insult to identity. Those who refused to abandon Earth, who chose to resist even without knowing the cost. Among them were farmers, former pilots, 2 poets, and a teenager from Nairobi who had hacked into military satellites and rerouted them to track the storm's movements. They weren't a military unit anymore. They were something stranger, a people defined by their refusal. Rami approached from the southern ridge, face streaked with dust. The ascendants left orbit. Last wave of evac ships breached the outer atmosphere 20 minutes ago. Elias felt the weight of that moment settle deep in his chest. It wasn't just that humanity had split. It was that no one knew which side was right. "How many stayed?" he asked. Global estimates dropping fast. Maybe 20 million still on the surface. Could be less. He nodded slowly. "Then we make it count." Inside the command bunker, patched together from pre-collapsed satellite stations and geothermal tunnels, the first of the resonance coils was brought online, the room lit with pulses of blue light, tracing the contours of the floor like veins in a living body. Ria stood beside a massive obsidian core, harvested from the ruins of an ancient volcano, and began calibrating the anchors. "Theoretically," she said, "we're syncing our neural frequencies with the Earth's magnetic harmonics. If we can establish feedback stability, we become extensions of the planet." Symbiosis? Elias asked. Or fusion, she replied, not looking up, depending on how the storm reacts. The concept had started as a theory she'd buried in a university thesis long before the world went mad. It was never supposed to be tested. But now, desperation had turned ideas into instructions. Elias volunteered to be the first. They lowered him into the chamber at dawn. The harness resembled something between a spacesuit and a sarcophagus, its thick cables drilling into bedrock, its sensors wrapped around his limbs, spine, skull. His pulse fed directly into the core. If it overloads, Rial warned, your body could disintegrate in under 3 seconds. Elias gave a dry smile. Then make sure it doesn't. They activated the anchor. Instantly, pain bloomed across every nerve in his body, not as heat or pressure, but as something elemental, like being rewritten on a cellular level. His vision fractured into layers of light and memory. He could feel the planet beneath him, not metaphorically. Actually feel it. Tectonic rhythms pulsed under his skin like a second heartbeat. The hum of iron and quartz resonated in his bones. He became part of the Earth's story, however briefly. Above ground, the storm surged. Lightning veined clouds. Gravity buckled in parts of the southern hemisphere. People began to float, lifted inches then feet above the ground. Screams echoed over dead cityscapes as the sky clawed at the living. But Elias held, and the system stabilized. The core dimmed, the readings leveled. Ria exhaled, wiping sweat from her brow. He's alive, she whispered. The second anchoring was easier, then the third, one by one. Volunteers stepped forward, tethering themselves not just to rock and soil, but to the very rhythm of the earth itself. The process was grueling. Some collapsed in seconds. A few never came back. But the ones who did, something had changed in them. Their senses sharpened. Their heartbeats slowed, synchronized with the slow, ancient tempo of the crust. Rami, after his own anchoring, began predicting the storm's pulses to the second. A poet named Lyra said she could hear colors. No one laughed. Everyone listened. Outside the compound, the world grew more volatile. Karinath returned during a midnight surge, his form flickering at the base's edge like a candle in wind. This time, he brought no message. He only watched, silent and still, as the ground had struggled to erect massive resonance pylons over key tectonic points. Elias approached him, unarmored, the tether from his spine still pulsing with residual energy. You expected us to fall apart, he said. Karinatha's gaze did not waver. You are still falling. We're not running. That may be worse. Elias stepped closer. Why is it so important that we leave? Karinath was silent for a long moment before answering. Because the storm does not just destroy. It judges. And once it begins, it remembers. You are shaping its memory. The words chilled Elias more than the cold wind ripping over the plain. The idea that the storm had memory, or worse, intention, changed everything. But he didn't let it show. Then we'll give it something to remember, he said. Over the following days, the team refined the anchoring process. The suits were upgraded, streamlined. The ground became more than just survivors. They became symbionts, walking fuses between Earth and humanity. They called themselves the Bound. But the storm had noticed. It began striking directly at their installations, lightning not random but targeted, coiling around pylons like serpents. Structures melted. One outpost in Chile vanished mid-sentence from a satellite feed. Still they rebuilt. They tethered. They endured. One evening, as Elias surveyed the horizon from the eastern ridge, he saw it. The center of the storm had begun to slow. Its rotations no longer blurred. The eye had widened, pulsing instead of spinning. We're affecting it, Riyah said quietly beside him. It's responding. He didn't know whether to feel hope or dread. Below them, the newest Cobra Bound were tying themselves to the earth, some literally, wrapping lengths of copper filament and vibrational wire through the loops in their harnesses, whispering prayers as they pressed their bodies flat to the trembling ground. It was both science and belief now, ritual and resistance, and the storm was listening. The ground rumbled with a low, mournful groan beneath the encampment as dawn broke over the horizon. painting the cracked terrain in bruised orange and sickly gold. Elias stood near the central pylon, sweat beating beneath his armor, though the air was ice cold. His tether pulsed faintly, a gentle throb from the earth's core reaching up to the stone like a heartbeat shared. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let it anchor him, a reminder that he was not alone in this. Not anymore. Rhea approached, her breath clouding in the chill, holding a data slate with trembling fingers. She didn't look up at first. "We lost the Outlands array," she said flatly. "It collapsed under a harmonic shockwave at 0400 hours. No survivors." Elias felt the grief pass through him like lightning. Fast, bright, destructive. He'd known 2 of the engineers stationed there. He could still hear one of their laughs echoing during the last uplink call. But mourning was a luxury they could no longer afford. "How many pylons still hold the grid?" he asked. 9 active. For damage but reparable. 2 gone. Then we reinforced the 9. Rhea nodded but didn't move. "There's something else." She tapped the slate, bringing up a waveform diagram. "The storm, it's evolving. The magnetic patterns are becoming recursive, almost sentient in structure. It's not just reacting anymore, it's learning." Elias exhaled slowly. He had suspected as much. The storm's pulses had started following rhythms they hadn't encoded, mimicking the harmonics their pylons emitted. It had felt like resistance. Now it felt like dialogue. "The storm is listening," Rami had said during the last team council. But what if it's also speaking? No one had laughed. Not since Karinatha's cryptic warning. The alien's words had embedded themselves into every decision, every strategy. The storm remembers. Lyra, the poet-turned-pylon technician, had gone silent for 2 days after that, only to return with a strange verse etched in charcoal along the walls of the generator bay. "We anchored too deep. Now it dreams of us." In the days that followed, the bound began to change in subtle, unnerving ways. They spoke less, moved more deliberately, as though every gesture were part of a larger choreography. Their dreams were synchronizing, overlapping. Elias himself had woken mid-sentence from a shared vision, a world of burning sky and floating cities crushed under weightless gravity. He knew it wasn't madness. It was the earth whispering. One night, Karinath stepped into the heart of the main compound, uninvited but unchallenged. His translucent form shimmered with light, refracted by particles no one else could see. He carried no weapon. His eyes met Elias's, and for the first time there was something in them that looked like sorrow. "You have trespassed into memory," he said. The planet was never inert. It was quarantined. Rhea stood slowly, ashen. Quarantined from what? Karinath turned his gaze to the swirling sky. From itself, a will submerged in dormancy. It once shaped this galaxy with thought alone. But then it dreamed, and its dreams made us. A hush fell. Even the machine seemed to still. Elias stepped forward. "Then why did you let us awaken it?" Karinath gave the faintest bow. "We warned you. But curiosity is a gravity you cannot escape." The days that followed were desperate. The bound worked in silence, strengthening the resonance pylons, sinking them in a ring formation to match the storm's growing symmetry. The earth beneath their feet was no longer just soil and stone. It pulsed with awareness. Occasionally, a low thrumming sound would rise to the bedrock, unprovoked, like a song sung by something vast and buried. Rami cracked the first translation of the pulses, mathematical sequences resembling ancient musical notations. "It's communicating in a loop," he explained, "like chanting, as if it's trying to remember who it used to be. Or remind us," Lyra whispered. "When the first pillars of fire erupted from the ground near the Pacific Shelf, entire regions lost power. A ripple effect knocked satellites out of alignment. The last remaining orbital station, once filled with fleeing humans, fell silent. The message was clear. There was no escape into the sky anymore. Still, the bound pressed forward. The 9th pylon came online just as the storm's core reached its lowest altitude in recorded history. The clouds above no longer swirled. They pulsated in time with the Earth's harmonic grid. It was no longer chaos. It was choreography. Rhea called it planetary entrainment. Elias called a reckoning. Then came the anomaly. A sudden shift in the storm center. Its spiral reversed direction, inverting its pull. Instead of pushing outward, it began drawing inward, as though inhaling the atmosphere itself. Animals across the planet froze in place. Rivers stopped moving. The sky turned briefly colorless, a blank canvas suspended over the horizon, and from its center, something emerged. A figure, not Karinov, not alien nor human, descended in flickers of magnetic static. It was tall, limbless, formed entirely of shifting geometric patterns. It did not walk. It simply was. A projection, a thought made manifest by the storm's will. Rami collapsed on the spot, bleeding from his ears. Lyra screamed and began reciting poetry not yet written. Elias stepped forward. "You are the storm," he said, voice steady. The figure pulsed in reply. Not words. Emotions, curiosity, sorrow, confusion. It projected an image into the minds of everyone present. A vast civilization of energy beings, bound to a world of sentient storms, who once seeded planets with life as a form of remembrance. Then something had gone wrong. The world had turned inward, began consuming memory, not sharing it. They had quarantined it, buried its will in magnetic chains, and forgotten it, until humans arrived, until humans listened. "You awoke the sleeper," Karinov said softly, standing beside them now. "You did what no species dared." Elias swallowed hard. "Is that bad?" Karinov did not answer. The figure shifted again, and a dozen bound fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the force of its presence. But Elias stood tall, tether pulsing. "We didn't come to dominate. We came to understand. If we have to become part of the storm to survive, so be it." For a moment, the figure was still, then it began to dissipate, peeling apart into threads of golden light that scattered across the sky. The storm roared, then went silent. Not gone. Waiting. Riaz stepped to Elias's side. "What did you do?" "I don't know," he said, "but I think we've been given a choice." The pylons flickered. The ground trembled. A soft vibration passed through every bound simultaneously. And above them, the storm's eye closed slowly, like a slumbering god returning to rest. But something had changed. The earth no longer felt passive. It watched. It remembered. And the bound knew they were no longer just survivors. They were its voice, and it had begun to speak again. The sky no longer bled lightning. It shimmered, golden veins woven through vast expanses of ash and steel-gray cloud, as if the storm had been tamed into something almost beautiful. But the bound knew better. It wasn't gone. It was breathing, watching. The silence was not peace. It was anticipation. Elias stood atop the obsidian ridge, tethered still, though the coil lines had begun to pulse with a gentler rhythm, more echo than command. Below him, the plain stretched in a strange, waiting stillness. Birds had returned in small flocks. Vegetation pushed through cracks in the scorched soil. The earth was stirring, but not with chaos this time. With intent. They called it the interim. For 22 days, the storm held its shape, but made no move. No new magnetic surges. No tremors. No firefalls. Karinov hadn't returned. Whatever consciousness had manifested from the storm no longer spoke. The bound used the time to repair what they could, to study the pulse of the planet now that it had a voice. But the question pressing on every mind, a pressure they couldn't escape. What now? Elias descended the ridge toward the central encampment, where Rial was reviewing thermal maps with Lyra and 2 others. The poet's arms were scrawled with new verses, not written but etched, burned into her skin by some unknown force. She said the storm had given them to her in sleep. She could recite them in perfect cadence, though the language wasn't one they understood. Still, it moved people. It made engineers cry and soldiers tremble. "It's communicating through metaphor now," Riaz said without looking up. "Or memory. Or myth. I'm honestly not sure. It's all the same to it," Elias murmured. "It doesn't see the difference." Rami appeared behind them, gaunt but alert, a nervous energy twitching in his fingers. He had stopped sleeping days ago, convinced the earth was close to revealing something final. "I mapped the pulse patterns of the fossil records," he said. You're not going to believe this. He tapped the table, and a projection rose, a lattice of geological data, pulse frequencies overlaid with global fault lines and species extinction markers. They align, he said. Every major extinction event on this planet, every single one, correlates with an identical harmonic inversion, the same frequency we triggered during the anchorings. Elias stared. You're saying Earth's done this before? I think it's its version of a reset. The storm is an anomaly. It's a system response, a memory purge. And we interrupted it. Riyadh's voice was quiet. We may be living inside a mind trying to forget us. The thought settled over them like dust. What if humanity hadn't been an accident of evolution, but a symptom of the Earth's dreaming? What if civilization was a byproduct of a mind distracted by its own subconscious? And now, waking, it sought to cleanse a dream, the same way a body shakes off fever. That night, Elias walked alone to the oldest pylon, the first they ever activated, now quiet but still humming faintly, like the last heartbeat of an ancient god. He placed his hand against it, half hoping it would surge again, even violently. Instead, it warmed. You're not angry, he whispered. You're lost. A voice answered, not in his ears, not in the air, but inside his blood. Not lost, divided. He staggered back, breath shallow. Who are you? You are. I am. We were. Now converging. The message fractured as it entered him, a dozen meanings in a single breath. Behind his eyes, images flashed. Prehistoric skies, continents reshaping, species blinking out as if erased from a page. And then towers, lights, humanity blooming across the crust like a brief fire. The earth remembered it all, not with hatred, not with affection, just with clarity. He fell to his knees, the tether thrumming violently. It was no longer just a bridge. It was a mirror, and what stared back was terrifyingly vast. In the days that followed, more bound began to receive the same messages, fragments of identity, as if the earth were piecing itself together from their neural patterns, trying to recall what it once was by looking through them. Some went mad. Others became serene, unreachable, eyes glowing faintly in low light. The line between human and host blurred. Riyadh gathered the remaining leaders. We're at a threshold, she said. Either we finish syncing with it, or we break from it entirely. What if syncing means becoming it? Someone asked. Losing ourselves? Rami stood. What if we already were it, and this is just a remembering? The council divided, some arguing for a final severance of the tethers, to preserve what was left of independent humanity. Others, including Elias, believed the choice had already been made, that the moment they grounded themselves, body and soul, they had accepted the merging. Elias returned to the ridge once more, this time with Lyra, who had grown strangely calm. Her verses had changed. Now they spoke of beginnings, not ends. You feel it, don't you? She said, fingers brushing the stone beneath them. Elias nodded. It's not just the earth. It's us. It always was. She looked out the horizon, where the storm remained suspended, as if waiting for a signal. What do we tell it? She asked. Elias turned to the sky, to the watching spiral above. The choice wasn't between survival and extinction. It was between fragmentation and coherence, between being a species and becoming a symbiont consciousness. To remember was to become more than flesh. He stepped forward, unlatched the safety coils, and anchored himself fully, not as defense, but invitation. The earth responded. The pylon flared to life. The storm contracted across the planet. Every bound felt it, the pulse, the thought, the acceptance. And above them, the spiral began to dissolve, not into chaos, but into light. It was not an ending. It was the emergence of something new, something remembered,